The antidote to feel-good history is not feel-bad history, but honest and inclusive history. James W. Loewen. We're taught that in 1620, the Pilgrims fled harsh religious persecution in Britain, sailed across the Atlantic, and stepped ashore at Plymouth Rock in what is now Massachusetts. With little or no food and shelter, the Pilgrims struggled to survive a brutal winter until a friendly Indian, nicknamed Squanto, came along and showed them how to cultivate crops. Their first harvest resulted in a feast, and the Pilgrims gave thanks to the kind Indians for helping to bring the colony back to life. But is that really what happened? The more accurate history of Thanksgiving actually begins with the Native American Indians and not with the Pilgrims, as we have been taught to believe. The Wampanoag and other Algonquian indigenous peoples first began settling in New England about 9,000 to 12,000 years ago. They were primarily a nomadic hunting and gathering culture. Like indigenous groups everywhere, the Wampanoag had a reciprocal relationship with nature, and they believed that as long as they give thanks to the bountiful world, it would give back to them. Long before the arrival of the Pilgrims, the Wampanoag held frequent Thanksgiving-like celebrations, giving thanks in the form of feasts and ceremonial games. Wampanoag numbered 50 to 100,000, occupying 69 villages scattered throughout what is now southern Massachusetts and eastern Rhode Island. But when the Pilgrims arrived in 1620, they found that much of the former Wampanoag towns had been decimated by a plague that spread through the population in 1617 and 1618. Entire villages had been wiped off the map. In fact, up to two-thirds of the Wampanoag perished during those years. However, for a brief moment in history, the interests of the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag did align. But what most people do not know about the first Thanksgiving is that the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims did not sit down for a big turkey dinner, and it was not an event that the Pilgrims had planned, or that the Wampanoag knew about or were invited to in advance. Most historians believe that what actually happened was, since the Pilgrims needed help with their land and their crops, and the decimated and weakened Wampanoag needed help defending against rival tribes, the Wampanoag, needing to strengthen their defenses, suggested a mutually beneficial relationship in which the Pilgrims would give their weaponry to the Wampanoag in exchange for food and farming help. As a result, the Pilgrims produced a bountiful supply of food that summer, and the Wampanoag were able to defend themselves against the Narragansett. The Feast of Indigenous Foods that took place in October 1621, after the harvest, was indeed one of thanks, but more notably, it symbolized the rare, peaceful coexistence of the two groups. And that is what we refer to as the first Thanksgiving. While today Thanksgiving is one of our nation's favorite holidays, it has a far different meaning for many Wampanoag, who now number between 4 and 5,000. Thanksgiving itself has become a day of mourning for all Native people, not just Wampanoag. At noon every Thanksgiving Day, hundreds of Native people from around the country gather at Coles Hill overlooking Plymouth Rock for a national day of mourning. It is an annual tradition that was started in 1970 when Wampanoag Representative Frank James was invited by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to give a speech at an event celebrating the 350th anniversary of the Pilgrims' arrival. He was then disinvited after the event organizers discovered that his speech was one of outrage over the atrocities and broken promises that the Wampanoag had endured. In his undelivered speech, James wrote, "This action by the Massasoit was perhaps our biggest mistake. We, the Wampanoag, welcomed you, the white man, with open arms, little knowing that it was the beginning of the end." Such is the true story of the holiday that we call Thanksgiving, and the one told by the Native Americans of New England.